Glad you're here today. Aren't you glad his love never fails, it never gives up, never runs out? It's wonderful. I'm so glad you joined us today, and for our online community who's joined us online during the service, you know that at any time that you want to see these services, even though we're not recording them in the studio anymore, all the services are still available online. You can go to our YouTube channel. You can see those services. They're under a different tab now. They're under the live tab instead of just the video tab, but you can see all the services that you've missed and be sure you stay caught up on every message. We've been in this series called Less Stress, and today I want to talk to you about establishing priorities as we get started. Let's pray. Father, we are grateful for this time we've had to worship you, and we're very grateful that there are people who are gathered here today and in living rooms across the Metroplex and across the state and even around the world who are joining us to be a part of this time where we gather around your word and want to learn from you. So I pray, God, that you'd use the things I want to share out of my experience, strength, and hope, as well as the things that your word teaches us about how we can establish priorities that will better honor and serve you and create a whole lot less stress in our life. In Jesus' name, amen. So back in 1989, I think practically every person read this book called The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People by Stephen Covey. The third principle was about putting first things first. And that principle was so important to Covey that he ended up writing a book just about that principle. But really what first things first is about understanding what you truly value and then making sure that your life is primarily oriented around that value or those values. It's about keeping the main thing the main thing. And that's really difficult for a lot of us, and it's especially difficult when it comes to finances. It seems when it comes to our financial priorities, they're often the result of things that happen to us over which we have little control. I mean, who among us has never experienced a major financial setback that you did not anticipate? Maybe you got sick and you were sick for some time, and then all the bills started to roll in. And you started getting bills from doctors you thought, I don't know who this person is. I'm not even sure they saw me, right? I mean, you just get so many bills. And not just that, maybe a pipe breaks beneath the foundation of your home, and somebody's actually has to dig under your foundation to find that, or they drill through your foundation to replace that pipe. It could be that you went through a layoff. You had to repair the transmission on your vehicle, which is not a cheap kind of expense to have to afford at the last minute. Or, like what happened to me this last Friday, I had to have oral surgery to begin an implant to the tune of $5,000. So, that's not something I was planning in this year's budget, but all of a sudden, I got to lay out that money to have that done. So, these unexpected expenses, they all come our way. None of us immune, and none of us ever are spared. And sometimes it seems that these unexpected expensive setbacks dictate where much of our money goes. And to be completely honest with you, for years, that's the way my life was. It seemed that one financial crisis after another was just steering my life. The uncontrollable and the unexpected dictated where much of my money was going. And I got really tired of living that way. The one thing I knew was this: unless and until I built margin into my life, unless I built an intentional buffer zone between my actual expenses and the unexpected, I would constantly surrender my financial priorities to financial emergencies, to things beyond my control. I'd always be a victim of circumstance. So I had to build margin. Margin is that space between what you earn and what you spend. It's wiggle room. It's about the ability to address a financial crisis without having to go into debt. It's about less worry. It's about less stress. It's about more freedom. So today what I want to do is I want to walk you through 3 principles that help me to establish a buffer zone, to give myself breathing room no matter what emergency I might face. And I'll say this right up front. If you feel like your financial life right now is a mess, or you're just always teetering on the edge of one, there is hope. None of the principles I share with you today is going to change your situation overnight. But if you commit to this path and you work these principles, in time, it will make a world of difference. One of the most common pieces of advice that I hear today, especially related to finances, is to live within your means. And that makes a lot of sense, but I don't agree with it. I don't agree with it because living within your means does not account for the unexpected. If you're always living within your means, and then all of a sudden you have a major unexpected expense, you won't necessarily have the wherewithal in your budget to address that problem. The best advice that was ever given to me financially was to live beneath your means. You see, if you spend less than what you could, you'll rarely regret it. This is an important lesson I learned the very painful way. I mean, I could drive a nicer, newer car than what I drive, but I have a dependable vehicle. It gets me where I need to be. But the best part is, it's been paid for many years now. My only real expenses from year to year are gas and oil changes and tires. I had it in the shop one time last year. The repair bill was less than $100. In fact, the most expensive expense I have had on this car since I've owned it is I once had to pay $700 to have the air conditioner replaced. Part of the reason my expenses are low is before I bought this car, I researched what is the most dependable, reliable car in America. And on almost every single list, it was a Toyota Camry. I said, well, that's the car for me because it seems like every car I've ever bought has been a problem, and it's cost me tremendously. So I started to look for that kind of vehicle. So I bought an older, reliable Toyota Camry, but it's not just cars. I could live in a larger, nicer, newer home. But again, my house is paid off. I only have to pay my taxes and insurance. It does need work, and I'll do the work as I can afford to do it. But it's a roof over my head, and now that my children are grown and gone, I have 2 extra bedrooms to do with as I please. I could buy new clothes and new shoes, but I enjoy thrift shopping. I still find clothes and shoes that are barely worn. Now, everything I wear, except my underwear and socks, okay? I'm not buying those at a thrift store. Everything I wear is pretty much thrifted. In fact, my wife and I, we enjoy this so much, we do it for fun. One of our favorite dates, we do this about every couple months, is we sneak off to Austin for the night. It's less than a tank of gas to get to Austin. It's $100 for a hotel. We find all kinds of bargains. We eat great food, and we just enjoy each other's company so much. So it's a really fun date, and we come away with just great memories and you know, some new clothes that we found at thrift stores. And I'll add, most of the furniture in my house has also been thrifted. So to me, the most basic component of a successful financial plan is to live beneath your means. That way you have money left over for spending, for emergencies, for investing, and for giving. Now, if like me, you've made some mistakes in this area, it may take a little while to get the ship turned around, but here's what I can tell you. Where you are today is largely as a result of the choices you've made along the way. These are choices and decisions you've made that have put you where you are. If you don't like where you are, then it's going to have to require some new choices that will lead to a less stressful life. So let me walk you through the 3 that have been most helpful to me. The first is to practice frugality. Now, what is frugality? Frugality is not stinginess. It's not being a penny pincher. It's not just buying things that are on sale. It's not wearing your suit and clothes until they're ribbons and falling apart. The practice of frugality is about removing desire for status, glamour, and luxury. And the reason we can let go of things like status, glamour, and luxury is because our life is not defined by externals. We let our life be defined by God. Frugality runs against the grain of a culture that's obsessed with the pursuit of happiness. In the pursuit of happiness, it's all about indulgence and pampering and pleasure and giving in to your desires. Frugality rejects the notion that I need stuff to make me happy. So we practice frugality of our energy and our time and our money so that we might better serve God and ourselves. So listen to these verses that undergird the importance of frugality. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have. You'll never learn to be frugal unless you learn to be content. Once you learn to be content with what you have, you learn I don't have to have all these other things. Again, related to money, listen to Solomon. The wise man saves for the future. What does the foolish man do? Spends whatever he gets. So we spend less. We don't spend every penny we have. That's frugality, and that's wise. So how do we practice frugality? Well, here's a couple of suggestions. Do an inventory. So what I'm suggesting is going through your house and taking note of what's necessary and what's luxury. What do you need versus what you're hanging on to? For every luxury item, ask yourself this simple question. Would I be willing to give this up if God asked me to do that? Ask yourself, could the time and energy and money that I spent in acquiring this thing have been invested in better ways? And how might God want you to use those luxuries today? If you're convinced that God might be asking you to get rid of them after you've listened to him in prayer and maybe talked to a fellow believer about that, then get rid of them in a way that doesn't produce more waste. Turn it into a blessing. So I'll give you an example of this. Some years back, we were having a typical Texas summer, terrible, awful, oppressive heat. But I was reading the newspaper, the Dallas Morning News, and I discovered that in South Dallas, copper thieves were breaking into people's personal air conditioners and stripping out all the copper and then selling it for a profit, right? Well, what happened in South Dallas is one woman whose air conditioner had been raided for the copper, she died that night because her house got too hot and she couldn't cool it. And when I read that, so I'm in my office, I'm reading this article, and I'm looking around my office, and literally every wall of my office, there's a bookshelf filled with books from the floor to the ceiling. And I asked myself the question, am I just a book collector now? Because I had so many books, and the honest truth is, I'd read almost all those books. And I thought, I've already read them. I got what was good out of them. In fact, I take notes on the books when I read them, so I have what's good in them, and I've kept that. If it's not a reference work that I'll go back to again and again, why am I hanging on to this book? And so I decided then and there that I would call through my massive library, and I got rid of more than half of my books. There were so many books, it filled up an entire bed of a pickup truck, okay? And I went to Half Price Books, the big one down on Northwest Highway. By the way, if you gotta sell books, go there. You'll get more money there than any of the little places, okay? So I go there. Now, usually you take 2 big bags and they say, I'll give you $5, right? I mean, you just don't seem to get any money out of used books. Well, this time I got like $660 for all these books that I turned in. And what I did with that money is I knew a ministry leader in South Dallas who was working with a lot of these families who'd lost their copper from their air conditioner. I said, could you use this money to bless a family? The next day, he called me and said, Pastor, I want you to know that there was a family and they were about to have their children removed from the house because there was no air conditioner and no refrigerator. And with your $660, we were able to buy both for this family so they could keep their kids. And I thought, wow, what a great use of that. So that experience taught me to be more careful with the things I cling to. Often I go through and do an inventory of the things I possess, and I ask myself, am I holding on to somebody else's blessing? If all this does is sit around my house and take up space, is that the best use of that item? Could it be sold and turned into a blessing for somebody else? So we want to do regular inventories of our life to make sure that that sense of creep that happens where that we just accumulate more and more, that's not happening in our life, that we go through life with open hands. Here's another suggestion, that is to reconsider making purchases. And what I mean by that is don't just rush off to buy something because you want it or you need it. Ask God, God, what would you have me to do? What's my motives for buying this? Is my desire simply to have the latest and the greatest? Do I want to impress others? Is this something I truly need? Have I considered the impact of spending this money or of the payments if I add that to my already crowded budget? Or, here's a really important question, might God want to provide this in another way if I give him time and space to do it? So I'll give you an example of this. This is such a silly little thing, but I wanted a pair of black cowboy boots. I really wanted them. I've heard people, all these Texans talk about, if you get a good pair of cowboy boots, they fit like tennis shoes. You'll enjoy them so much. So I thought, that's what I want. I want a pair of black cowboy boots that fit like tennis shoes that I can enjoy. And I went to a country western store, and I said, I'm not buying a pair of black cowboy boots because they act like they're diamonds on your feet, right? I didn't want spend that kind of money. So I told Brenda, I said, Brenda, as you're going to yard sales and stuff like that, if you see some cowboy boots in my size, then buy me some black cowboy boots. She's the only person who knew that I wanted these and would look for them, but I wasn't going to go out and buy something new. So this was some years back. We hadn't built this building on the front. So just from the hallway back was the old Food Lion. And we were there, and we were greeting people as they drove up on Sunday morning. And one of the greeters looked at me and said, Pastor, what size shoe do you wear? And I told him. And he said, I have a pair of black cowboy boots. Would you like to have them? And he told me that he was diabetic, his arches had fallen, and he couldn't wear them anymore. And I said, I would love to have your black cowboy boots. And he gave them to me. And they were great. And they fit perfect. It was just wonderful. Free, right? So I decided I'm going to go into one of those Western stores after a couple weeks and get that boot cream, to keep the skin looking nice and everything. And I go in there and I go up to the clerk and I said, listen, where do you keep that boot cream for, special skins? Because a guy in my church gave me these black snakeskin cowboy boots. And the guy looked over the counter and looked at my feet and he said, sir, those aren't snakeskin. I said, oh, they're not. He said, no. He said, they're Anteater and they're by Lucchese. And I can show you a pair over there on the shelves. They're $1,600 a pair. I thought, wow. And you know what? I wore those in the rain. I wore them in the mud. I wore them everywhere because I didn't pay $1,600 for those boots. They were free to me. And I just wore them, and they were just like tennis shoes, and I wore them everywhere till I wore them out. Literally, the soles, there were holes in both soles. I sold them on eBay like 10 years later and still got $600 out of them. That's how valuable those boots were. But that's the thing, is if I had rushed out to a Western store and just paid good money for a pair of boots, I wouldn't have gotten that thing that God said, I just want to give these to you because you're my servant and I want you to have Anteater. So he gave me cowboy boots. It was great. Sometimes we are so impetuous and so quick to act as if if this is going to happen, it's going to happen because I make it happen. And when we do that, we deny God the opportunity to provide something at a discount or maybe even for free. So pray about everything before you buy it. Is this the deal? Is this how God you're going to provide it? Now, you've all probably heard of Kiplinger's Personal Finance magazine. In that magazine, there's a column that's written by Knight Kiplinger. Back in September 2006, he wrote a book entitled The Invisible Rich. And it was an article that described how you can often not tell if a person's wealthy just by looking at them. In fact, looks can be deceiving. And he said, the person next door who drives a 10-year-old Chevy is more likely to be a rich person than that zero net worth hotshot executive that runs around town in a high-priced BMW. And one of the statements the article made is the biggest barrier to becoming wealthy is living like you're rich before you are. Why? Because all that discretionary spending, the chic apartment, the frequent travel, the restaurant meals, the consumer electronics, the fancy clothes, the hot drive, that crowds out all the savings that could help you become wealthy or independent one day. In other words, if you spend more than you earn, you're never going to be rich. And the implication is if you spend less than you earn, that's the path to acquiring wealth. So wealth is what you save, it's not what you spend. So there was another book called The Millionaire Next Door. I don't know if you ever read it. It was by Thomas Stanley. He said, in this country, we have a lot of people who make a lot of money, but they spend it all. And that's the truth. And by the way, in case you didn't realize this, among people who make six figures, the majority of people are living paycheck to paycheck. So don't just think because you're only making $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year that you're the only person living paycheck to paycheck. A lot of people are spending beyond their means. In The Millionaire Next Door, he used a well-known Texas phrase to describe these people. He said, big hat, no cattle. And what he meant by that is they show a lot and they spend a lot, but they don't have a lot. So let me give you a real-life example of this. Last year, 2024, the sixth most rich person in the world was Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett. One of the things that's always impressed me about Warren Buffett is where he lives. Are you familiar with this story? This is where he lives. This is his home in Omaha, Nebraska. They say it's one of the best investments he ever made. He purchased this house in 1958 for $31,000. It's now worth $1.4 million. But here's the deal. In all these years and with all his wealth, he's never moved. He's never felt a need to upgrade to a bigger, nicer, better place. He's been content to live in the same house for 67 years. There are countless people who'll never make the top 10 wealthiest people in the world who live in houses worth far more than Buffett's. But maybe one of the reasons that Buffett is so wealthy is because he doesn't feel a need to buy things he doesn't need. You see, to be more frugal, it begins by questioning the narrative. You've got to begin to ask yourself, how do I keep my basic living expenses low so that I have more margin to address problems as they come up? And when it comes to basic living expenses, the three categories you have to address: where you live, what you drive, what you eat. Food, transportation, housing, those are the three basic expenses in everyone's budgets. So if your house payment's high, then every other expense related to your house is high. The utilities are high, the repairs are high, and here in Dallas County, the taxes are astronomically high. So let's talk about just two of these. Number one is buying a house. So think about if you lived in a house that wasted less space. Maybe our mortgage, insurance, taxes, heating, cooling wouldn't take so much of our monthly budget. Maybe it wouldn't take 2 wage earners to make the payment. Maybe we could do more of what we really wanted to do. Now, some of you have heard of the tiny home revolution. Tiny homes in the US are becoming more and more common. It's increased by 67% since 2016. In 2020, the global market for tiny homes reached $2.4 billion. The top states with tiny homes in the US are California, Texas, and Florida. But here's what I want to tell you. You don't have to go all that extreme in order to save money, though I do know a couple of Spring Creekers who live in tiny homes. At one point in my life, I bought into the lie that I needed to buy as much house as I could afford or qualify for. So I bought a house on the corner lot in a golf community, 3,600 square feet with a swimming pool. In those days, I knew what it was like to be house rich and cash poor. I'll never forget, the first electricity bill in Texas in the middle of summer was more than my previous mortgage payment. And I thought, what have I gotten myself into? Everything was so much more expensive in this bigger house. And it shocked me. You know, if I didn't have that big house payment, I wouldn't have all the other big expenses that came with a big house. So here's the most important realization I had. I'm in charge of my own peace of mind. Smarter choices lead to a better quality of life. I don't have to buy as much house as I qualify. Who says that? Realtors say that. Why do realtors say that? Because they make a commission on you buying. So it's a vested interest that you buy as much house as you can because their paycheck's bigger. And by the way, one of our realtors came to me after the service and said, Pastor Keith, not all realtors are that way. And I said, you're right. Not all realtors are that way. You are not that way. My realtor was, okay? So just be aware, though, that it's not in your best interest necessarily to buy as much house as you could possibly afford. So after buying the big house in the golf community, after 2 years, I sold it. I didn't lose money on it. I didn't make money on it. I then bought another house, the house I live in now. It was half the square footage and half the payment. And because it was cheaper and more affordable, I paid it off much quicker than that original loan. And as a result, we are able to live in this home, and sometimes living in an older home can be frustrating, right? But I have the ability to take on repairs and projects as I can afford them. And because I don't have a house payment anymore, it allows me to save up cash so I can make those repairs without going into debt. Here's another major expense that's huge, and you have to think about how you buy a car. The way we typically buy a car is one of the most expensive lessons we learn, and that is it wastes a lot of money. When you buy a new car, the depreciation on that new car is lightning fast. I mean, the moment you drive it off the lot, it will drop like $7,000 to $8,000 in value. And if you don't believe that, turn around and try to resell it to the car lot right then. They won't offer you what you just paid for it because it's a used car. It's pre-owned now. So what we do is we think about, what's the difference between buying brand new and buying used? Well, with new vehicles, because of the depreciation and the lightning fast loss of value, what ends up happening is after 2 years of making payments, you still owe more on the car than what the car is worth. So what happens is after 2 years, you lose your job and you can't afford that payment anymore. Or something happens with your health and you say, I can't afford this brand new car. Well, what happens for most people is they take what they still owe on that car and they roll it into the note on a newer car that's cheaper, which means it's just going to take even longer to pay off that next car. So let's be frank. Buying a used or a pre-owned car saves you a lot of money. And one of the main benefits of a pre-owned car is the depreciation has already occurred. So after 2 to 3 years, the bulk of it's happened, and you're going to have a car that's pretty much worth what you're financing. Now, my last 2 vehicles I bought were at least 5 years old. And when I bought them, they had less than 20,000 miles on them. Vehicles like that are not impossible to find. If you're not familiar with this app, and I'm just giving you some practical advice here, this app, Auto Trader. You can literally put all the parameters of your search into Auto Trader, and you don't have to go from car lot to car lot, used car lot, brand new car lot. All these dealerships list their vehicles on Auto Trader. So I put in a 200-mile search radius, which includes Austin. My last 2 cars came from Austin. I say I want a car 4 to 5 years old. I want to pay this amount of money, and I want it to have less than 30,000 miles on it. You say, good luck with that. I promise you, you make that search this afternoon, you'll find at least 2 cars that way that are real low miles and that you can get at an affordable price. You know, I've owned 2 cars in my lifetime that were 10 years old that had less than 10,000 miles on them. I call them old granny cars. Now, I don't mean that as an insult, but a lot of elderly people will buy these big boats. One was a Buick Park Avenue, had like 9,000 miles on it. Man, I was cruising. It was such a fun car to drive, and I'd probably still own it today had somebody not wrecked it from the back and totaled the car on me, you know? But the thing is you can find cars that are affordable and like new, but you don't have to pay an arm and a leg for it. So right now, I drive a 2011 Camry. As I already mentioned, Camrys are extremely reliable. They're great on gas. They're roomy enough for my family. I bought it in 2016 from CarMax in Austin, Texas. I paid $200 to have it brought to Garland. Now, all I did is, first thing I said is go out, tell me if there's anything obviously wrong on the inside or the outside, and tell me if anybody smoked in it, because I just can't take a smoker's car. I can't, it just really gets to me. So they did that, and they said all these things are okay. So I paid that, and when I paid that to bring it up here, they applied that to the car when I bought it. So it's a 6-year-old car. It had 16,000 miles on it. I paid $17,000 for it. I've had it paid off for years. So I've been driving it for 9 years. I just turned over 110,000 miles on it. But because it's a 14-year-old car and it's paid off, I pay less in maintenance on this vehicle than any car I've ever owned. Now, if you go up, it's right out here in front, a little gray Camry. It's got plenty of dings down both sides. From a distance, it still looks good. Okay, I'm telling you, just don't get real close. But those dings don't make any difference in how it drives or gets me to where I'm going. So that doesn't matter. And here's the great thing about it. Once you ding a car, you just don't care anymore, right? You don't get all upset when people thrown open their doors and smack the sides. Like somebody literally, this was 2 weeks ago, ripped the whole back side. I mean, it's deep into the bumper and everything. And somebody told me, put nail polish remover on there or remove the paint. And it did. It didn't do anything with the scrapes, but the paint is gone off the car. And so I just don't care that much. It doesn't bother me. In fact, the person who did that to my car didn't leave a note or anything. But had they done that in my presence, I would have said, it's an old car, it's okay. But it did kind of bother me that they didn't tell me and give me the option of forgiving them, you know, but I would have forgiven them. So all that to say, like you and like me, I need affordable transportation. But I need something that fits my budget, and I need something I can fill up with gas no matter what the prices are. Rethinking major expenses like housing and our vehicles and our food really help us to create that margin. Here's another essential to live frugally: stop the bleeding. So I was in Boy Scouts for years. Many of you were in Girl Scouts, and you have to earn merit badges, and one of those merit badges is a first aid badge. And for the first aid badge, we had to go to the YMCA and actually sit through a course. And one of the things they said in that course is if you came upon somebody who was unconscious, they weren't breathing and they were bleeding badly, which should you address first? Should you try to revive them by resuscitating them or stop the bleeding? And they said stop the bleeding comes first. If it's a bad bleed, because you can bleed out in 1 minute. You can live without oxygen for 4. So if it's a bad bleed, you always stop the bleeding first. Well, this is true about finances too. Your finances, if you're bleeding, you got to stop that bleeding out. Basically, you have to make a decision to be done with debt. You say, I declare war on indebtedness. I've had it. I'm no longer going to leverage my future and rob my future to pay for my past. From now on, I'm going to operate on a pay-as-you-go basis. In other words, if I don't have the cash in my wallet or in my checking account, I'm not going to spend it. Now, this is not as easy as it sounds, because everything within our culture pushes us toward debt. I got a letter, I kid you not, in the mail just the other day from a credit card company. It said this: you're smart, you're confident, you're successful. Well, obviously they've done their research, right? I mean, they don't send these offers to dummies in Loserville. So they offered me a credit card with a personal line of credit worth thousands of dollars because they know I'm a good credit risk. They're confident I'm gonna make my payment on time. They believe I'll keep my balance under the credit limit. They believe in me. In fact, I think they believe in me more than my mom does. And then they said, Keith, you're going to get transfer services absolutely free, the lowest fixed rate in the nation, and pay no interest for 90 days on every purchase, every time, forever, because you deserve it. And now that I think about it, I do deserve that. Plus, they say, every time I spend $1, I earn 2 membership reward option points. I don't even know what those are, but I earn them every time I spend $1. And best of all, there's no limit to the points that I can earn. Now, you'd think they'd put a cap on an offer like that, but not for me. I get to keep racking them up. Now, on a separate sheet of paper in really small print, because apparently it's not very important, they do mention that if I forget or fall behind or fail to make the minimum payment, the rates could change dramatically, and something about surrendering my firstborn child. But again, that's unimportant because that's really small print. But I want to tell you one word that you'll never find in a credit offer: the word debt. They'll never use that word. It'll never come up. You know why? Because they don't believe they're selling debt. That's exactly what they're selling. They're going to talk to you about freedom. You can buy whatever you want, whenever you want it. It's always about freedom, never about debt. So I picked up Roget's thesaurus and looked up the word debt. Here's the synonyms for debt: to owe, to be obligated, in deficit, in default, insolvent, in over one's head, in arrears, pauper, destitute, penniless, needy, distressed, living hand to mouth, ruined, impoverished, hard up, beaten down, bereft, unable to make ends meet, embarrassed, broke, and busted. Now, if the credit card used any of those words, you and I would never fill out that application or send it in. Bottom line, the credit card company's not here to help you. MasterCard, Visa, American Express, Discover, they're not your friends. They're not trying to help you manage God's resources more faithfully. They only make a profit if you go into debt. Do you know what a deadbeat is? Now, we used to call a deadbeat a person who wouldn't pay their bills. But the credit card company doesn't call those people deadbeats. They call people deadbeats who pay off their credit card every month. If you pay off your credit card and you don't keep a balance, the credit card company doesn't make money off of you, so they call you a deadbeat. You're a deadbeat. You're just taking advantage of the card, and you're getting all the benefits without any of the debt. Now, one thing that's very clear when it comes to credit card spending: we lie. We lie about our true financial behavior. And this is true about credit card debt. Listen to this. Bankrate conducted a financial literacy survey, and here's what they found. 58% of respondents claimed to pay off their credit cards in full every month. A marked contrast to studies to show that that number is closer to 40%. So the majority of people say I pay it off every month. Only a minority actually do. So here's my question: why lie? Why do we lie about our financial reality? I'll tell you why we lie. We lie because we're ashamed. We're embarrassed. We don't like to admit that there's an area of our life that's out of control. But it's causing problems, isn't it? It's causing problems. It's robbing us of peace of mind. But any kind of toxic secret will eventually leak, and it will affect your relationships. Listen to this. 1/3 of Americans with credit card debt say no one else knows how much they owe, according to a new report. Or how about this? 2 in 5 Americans have withheld financial information or lied to their significant other about how much something actually cost, about their income level, their credit score, or how much debt they were actually carrying on their credit cards. So let's be honest. If we're lying about our financial behavior, it's a sure sign that we feel shame and we fear its disclosure. This is why we have to talk about these things. We have to break the power of secrecy, because the things that are secret in your life have more power over you than you realize. Secrets are the fuel for addiction, aren't they? It's shame that fuels all addiction. And if you have problems in finances and you feel a need to lie about those things, I'm telling you, the problem is far worse, because your lying is telling me that there's a shame factor involved in that, and not being truthful about it is causing you greater harm than anything. So we have to stop the debt cycle. We can't keep digging that hole. You got to stop the bleeding. So Brenda and I decided years ago we would live more frugally, live beneath our means intentionally, to create this margin, this buffer zone. We also made a decision to be done with debt. If we couldn't afford it, if we didn't have the money, we wouldn't go into debt for it. And unless it was absolutely essential, we wouldn't use credit. If we use our credit cards, it is always to be paid off every month. So these things help to create margin. The final thing we did, but we've actually done this final thing for years, and that is to put God first financially. So let me begin with something Randy Alcorn wrote. He said, ironically, many people can't afford to give because they're not giving. If you pay our debt to God first, then we will incur his blessing to help us pay our debts to men. But when we rob God to pay man, we rob ourselves of God's blessings. No wonder we don't have enough. It's a vicious cycle, and it takes obedient faith to break out of it. And I found that to be true in my life. Listen to the promises God makes when we put him first financially. Honor the Lord with your wealth and the first fruits of your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. Put me first, I'll take care of you. How about this from Jesus in the New Testament? Don't worry and ask yourselves, will you have anything to eat? Will we have anything to drink? Will we have any clothes to wear? Only people who don't know God are always worrying about such things. Your Father in heaven knows what you need all these things, but more than anything else, put God's work first and do what he wants. Then the other things will be yours as well. So Jesus makes really clear that when you and I worry, we're acting like non-believers. I'm acting like God doesn't even exist. Now, I want you to consider just for a minute the audience that Jesus was speaking to. Do you think they had more to worry about or less to worry about than we do? Far more to worry about. I mean, if you look at the audience that Jesus is speaking to, most of them are incredibly poor. They lived on less than $1 a day. They'd be poor until the day they died. 95% of them did not know how to read or write. Many were lame, many were sick. They had no medicines. Plagues would come into a city and would wipe out a third of the population. Many of them were slaves and would be slaves for the rest of their life. A child born in the first century world had the average life expectancy of 30 years. Look around this room, there's plenty of people over the age of 30. So would you say they have more to worry about or less? Well, a lot more. So now we're 2,000 years later. Living conditions have gotten exponentially better. We're better educated, we're healthier, we're better resourced, we're cleaner, we're freer. Hundreds of times over what the people had in those days. So isn't it great we don't have to worry anymore? Isn't it great that worry has been eliminated from the human condition? No, we worry more than ever, right? Because there's no way you can orchestrate your life in such a way that you eliminate worry. Worry doesn't happen through orchestrating a better life. Worry happens by trusting God. Worry gets eliminated by trusting God. That's where we learn to cease worrying. So Jesus told us, put God and his work first. Do what he wants. I'll take care of you. Your daily needs, I'll provide for that. If God is first, if he gets the first and best of your life, the Father will take care of the rest. That's Jesus' promise. So I'll tell you, for 40 years now, Brenda and I have consistently tithed to God's work. That means returning the first 10% of what we make to God. We've done it through good times. We've done it through bad times. We've done it through financially challenging times. We've done it through times of plenty. We just do it. We don't look in the bank account and say, hey, can we afford to do this week? We do it. We do it because we have seen God take care of our needs. I have never lacked. I've never missed a meal, you can tell that, right? I mean, God has provided for all of our needs because we put God first. And you know what? In all my time, in all my years of being a pastor, I have known some other people like us who made this same commitment. I've never known anybody who has consistently, regularly tithed who ever gave up the practice. Never. Never known any. Now, I've known people who've tried it for a few months and gave up on it at the first test, the first challenge that came along. They said, man, I can't do this. I got this big bill to pay. No, people who've done it consistently over years, they won't give it up because they know that God takes care of them because they take care of God. Now, maybe you're in a financially strained position right now and 10% is just an impossibility for you. I get that, so does God. But do something rather than nothing. And most of all, give to God first. Give to him as a priority of who he is and the recognition that he is the source of all good things in your life. So think of it like this. There's a grocery store down the street. It's called Tom Thumb. It's not your source of food. It's a distribution point for something you purchase that comes from another source. Every piece of fruit, every vegetable that you get at Tom Thumb is only there because it was farmed. And it was farmed because there was seed. And the seed wouldn't grow unless it was planted. And it wouldn't be planted unless there was soil. And it wouldn't grow unless there was sunshine and there was rain. And so no sun, no rain, no seed, no soils, then no fruits and no vegetables. God is the source of it all, not Tom Thumb. So don't get so excited about the channel through which you receive a thing that you forget the source from where it came. Now, a couple of years ago, there was a study done by an agricultural school in Iowa. And the report described what was required to get 100 bushels of corn from 1 acre of land. So 100 bushels, a bushel, in case you didn't know, is 50 to 52 pounds of corn grain, okay? So what does it take? Besides the hours a farmer puts in, what do you have to get that kind of yield? Here's what you have to have. 4 million pounds of water, 6,800 pounds of oxygen, 5,200 pounds of carbon, 160 pounds of nitrogen, and 125 pounds of potassium and other elements too numerous to listen. Besides that, you need sunshine, you need rain. But the most amazing thing to me about this study is its conclusion. Listen to this. Only 5% of the produce of a farm can be attributed to the efforts of people. You know what that tells me? No man or woman can claim to be self-made. There is so much that originates beyond our control, that so much originates in the heart of God. God is the source of all good things in your life. God's the source of your mind, your ability to reason. God's the source of the strength of your back that can do work. God is the source of all good things in your life. So no one arrives at success all on their own. All the factors that have to come in to make a farmer's work successful are so beyond them. This is why God comes back again and again to the reality that he owns everything. What we have, it comes from him. We own nothing. God owns everything. We just manage it. And so when I give, what I'm saying is, God, I recognize you're the source. And God says, I don't want to just hear you saying it. I want you to prove it by honoring me first. That's how you recognize that I'm your provider. So listen to this amazing promise that God makes. God will meet all your needs according to his glorious riches in Christ Jesus. So let's examine this verse. First is the word all. He says, I'm going to meet all of them. Every legitimate need in your life falls under that word all. Then he says will, that God will do it. He doesn't say he might do it or he'll consider doing it. He says he will. So this is a promise he's staking his reputation on. He's going to do what he said he's going to do. Then he says need. He doesn't say greeds. He says there's a difference between needs and greeds, right? Sure there is. What you genuinely need, God will provide. So if you don't have it right now, you must not need it right now. Then he says, according to his glorious riches. So it's not based on your bank account. It's not based on mine. It's not based on my budget or investments. It's not based on you at all. It's based on God's assets in Christ Jesus. So that tells you that this is limited to those who are followers of Jesus. This is not a promise for everybody, but those who are followers of Christ can claim this promise. Now, some of you are thinking, then how come I have financial needs? Is God a liar? Is he just exaggerating to make a point? Has God failed? Why aren't my financial needs met? I'll tell you why. Because this is a promise you just can't jerk out of the Bible, out of its context, and make it say what you want it to say. There's actually conditions on this promise. There's a premise to the promise, and if we don't understand the premise, we can't claim the promise. So let's look at the verses that come right before this verse. As you Philippians know, in the early days of your acquaintance with the gospel, when I set out from Macedonia, not one church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving, except you only. For even when I was in Thessalonica, you sent me aid more than once when I was in need. Not that I desire your gifts, what I desire is that more be credited to your account. I've received full payment and have more than enough. I am amply supplied. Now that I've received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent, they are a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice pleasing to God. You see, the reason that Paul is confident that God is going to meet all the needs of the Philippian church according to his riches and glory is because they were faithful to meet the needs of the Apostle Paul. They gave to God's work and they gave to God's workers. When people are faithful to give, God does his work in providing. So let me wrap up with this. This is a totally free deal here when it comes to giving to God, but it's a faith venture. You're going to have to make that decision. I'm not going to coerce you. I'm not going to guilt you. Not going to make you feel bad. I'm just going to tell you the truth of what God has said, and you can decide whether you're going to trust his promises. That's the deal. It's always been the deal. Because God loves cheerful givers. He doesn't want grudges. He doesn't want grouches. He wants people who do this willingly because they know God keeps his promises. I will tell you from the heart, my heart has been deeply grieved this week because the first time in our history we had to let an employee go because we don't have the budget. And this was a great employee, doing a wonderful job, somebody I dearly love. But I had to look him in the eye and I had to say, right now, administratively, we're too heavy for the budget that we have. And I have to let you go. And it crushed my heart. And I cried and I apologized to her. I said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I haven't, with my teaching and my leadership, been able to help the church understand that we have the people and we have the resources we need here to be able to do God's work. And I cannot continue to supply your position. And it makes me feel like a failure. It really does. I just feel like I totally failed this person in providing what she needed for her and her family. So I just want all of us in this room to just sincerely ask, God, what would you have me do? I know some of you are going through really financial times, and that I don't say any of that to make you feel bad. I'm just saying, you like me, at some point, you're going to have to make some decisions about how am I going to create some margin in my life so that I have room for financial emergencies, I have money left over to give and to save and to invest and all those things. That won't happen unless we begin to decide to live beneath our means and we decide to stop going into debt more and more and we decide to prioritize giving to God first. And if we do those things, God says, I'll take care of the rest. So I wonder if you just pray with me right now. Father, I just come to you acutely aware this is your church and these are your people. And we'll continue to make whatever decisions we need to make in order to live within the resources that we have coming into this church. God, I pray that you would just help us as your family to always keep you first in all things. That God, the first thing that we would think of when we're paid, when we receive a blessing from you, that we would turn around and we would be a blessing to the church, to the pastor of this church, to the ministry of this church. I pray, God, that you would move every heart to do that. I pray for all those who are just really, truly struggling, that they've got into a mess of their own making, and even sometimes of not of our making, because of the kind of surprises we can get from unexpected bills and health crises and problems with our house and car and all those kinds of things. I pray, God, that you would help us to realize that ultimately we are in charge of our own peace of mind, that the decisions we're making are leading to the kind of life that we're having. So I pray, God, that you would help us to build that kind of margin, that safety net into our own life by spending less than what we make, by choosing, God, to not go into debt over and over again and erode that margin in our life, and most of all, by enlisting the support of heaven, by putting you first in all things. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you. See you next week.